So I still have books that I haven't read, but I am traveling soon, and I either don't have time to read them and finish them before I go, or I have reasons for wanting to not read them until later in the year. So what I've decided to do to fill time that would normally be filled reading is read my copies of the 2011 relaunched Animorphs books. I know I've done this showing off the lenticular covers thing on YouTube before, but maybe not with this one, because this one I didn't find at the library sale with the batch of all the others. This one I actually bought at the Barnes & Noble where I used to buy the Animorphs during their first run. I decided to do it for old time's sake, even though I never planned on reading it. But the opportunity arose, and as pretty as all of these books are, and they will each get their own video and to show off how pretty they are, no book on my shelf is purely decorative. So it's actually convenient that I have this um, reason to read these. Um, and also, it's nice to be able to do this just from the perspective of now I've read the whole thing. I feel that from the original invasion to the last book, I know how it ends, ram the blade ship, and so I feel a freedom of being able to just take whatever Animorphs book I want off the shelf and not have to read them in sequence. So if I want to read the David trilogy, or Cassie's one-off adventure in Australia, or something about the Elemist or the Krayak, uh, or or the Visser Chronicles, probably never the Elemist Chronicles again. But so that's another thing that it's nice to have the freedom to just read Animorphs, not with the goal of finally getting through the whole thing. Um, the only semi-goal that I have reading these is trying to spot the ways in which they were changed um, for the 2011 editions, and I've heard things like they updated references, like maybe they put Starbucks in there. I don't think Starbucks was not mentioned in this one. Maybe it's in a later one. One that I definitely know that they did is in first publication, the first time the invasion was published, Jake manages to thought speak to Tobias while Tobias is in cat morph, and Jake is not in morph at all. And this was, I guess, originally going to be a possibility, but K.A. Applegate, Catherine Applegate, as she now lists her author name, I guess, with the reissue. I think by now she had already, by 2011, she had started putting Catherine Applegate as the author name on her book covers, but maybe there's some legal publishing thing that if it's an Animorphs book, it has to be K.A. Applegate. I will have to study the covers of the graphic novels, but anyway, she changed her mind about the rules of thought speak, and so that correction is in the book. Jake tries to thought speak with Tobias, but is unable to, and it is explicitly explained that it's impossible. Other than that, I did not notice many changes, and it's been 7, 8 years since the last time I read The Invasion, the original version. And so I wouldn't necessarily be, and I wouldn't do the thing where I go page by page in both copies and try to pick out where the changes happened. But there are some things where I think, where I got to it and I was like, oh, that might be something that they changed for continuity reasons, or to, they knew certain things were popular about the series, and so they went in and decided to emphasize them, or things that not necessarily popular with the series, but popular tropes since the series first ran, and they wanted to emphasize those qualities. Like, it feels a bit early for Rachel and Tobias to be forming the bond that we know that they form, but maybe it did start. I'd have to meticulously go through, and I'm not interested in doing that. It's just fun and interesting to be thinking these sorts of things. And also fun and interesting to look at the book as a setup for what I've so recently read, which is the entire thing. And I'll go first with the introductions of the characters. Now, it's from Jake's perspective, of course, and so, we see him inside and out. And I don't think, and I think that's helpful with him because he and his cousin Rachel are some the two less scrutable, the more inscrutable of the Animorphs. They don't wear their hearts on their sleeve. They are mostly internal, and they're keeping the things that make them them to themselves. I'll get to Rachel at the end. With Jake, it's the kind of reluctant acceptance of his leadership role and you know, decisions about putting people in danger, which, you know, from the outside of Jake, the reason they kind of thrust the leadership role on him is because he looks like he can do it without much trouble, and so the trouble is inside, and we see him inside here. Marco, his reasons for his reluctance to join the Yurk War are explicitly laid out, but not in an unsatisfying way. They're kind of, you know, built. She builds up to it. And he's reluctant. Jake says he knows why Marco is reluctant. He has his reasons, and then Marco eventually says it, but he says it in his Marco way, and he is sarcastic and insistent throughout. He bickers with Rachel, but that's Marco, and that's the Marco that's going to be going forward, that it's going to be built upon. That's Marco. Tobias is an interesting case because his main thing through the series, what he deals with, doesn't become a thing until the end of the book. So it's a very different story for Tobias, related, but different than after he gets stuck as a hawk. And so with this book, it's again heart on his sleeve sort of thing. The power to morph frees him from his body and his life that he is miserable in, with his parents gone, his relatives who don't care about him, but he can become a hawk, and he can fly. And he says explicitly in the book, he says, when Jake tells him, you have to morph out, you're running out of time, he says, as he's morphing out, he says, I don't like it when I lose my wings, or something like that. And, you know, this time reading it, in the world we currently live in, it's clear to me this would be helpful to people, specifically transgender people who feel trapped in their bodies and trapped in lives that they don't want to be in. And Tobias's excitement about the ability to escape that, I can see how someone in the 90s, not me, but someone in the 90s who was trans but couldn't express it, the world was not even as accepting as it is now, would see themselves in that character and take comfort in that character and embrace it. And so that's you know, a reason to go back to books, to see them in different ways based on how the world has changed, how you have changed as a person. And Cassie, finally, before I get to the inscrutable Rachel, Cassie, the daughter of two veterinarians, she's being a peaceful type of person, is reluctant to get into the fight, but also very excited at the prospect of being able to become animals. She's helped her parents with their work. She feels a closeness with animals, almost like she can communicate with them, and she is excited by the idea that she could actually communicate, see inside the mind of a horse or an osprey. I think she's one of the ospreys when they do bird morphs. And so that's the Cassie that we get here, very well drawn, and that is the Cassie that I recognize going forward. Another thing about reading it in the you know, rereading it in a different context, there are encounters that she has with a police officer who is also a human controller in this that read a little differently in the age of Black Lives Matter. But again, maybe back in the 90s, little black kids reading it, seeing that happen to the black character, the encounters with the police, maybe they would have seen something that was sadly familiar to them, but not something that I would have picked up on until now. So again, go back and read your old favorites. But then getting to Rachel, and this is probably why hers is the second book. Applegate gets the inscrutable ones that we need to actually look inside them to get to know them out of the way first in her cycling through of the characters. Rachel is introduced on two separate occasions as just kind of standing there, standing out in the crowd. The second time we meet her, she's kind of looking up so that she gets the tanning rays of the sun. It's just a thing that Rachel does, and she's also very tall. I think she's the tallest of the Animorphs. And so she's kind of an aside. She bickers with Marco, like I said, and she really loves Cassie, her best friend. She starts to get an affinity with Tobias, and of course Jake is her cousin. There's of course a kinship there, but she doesn't. She's not as visible. The Rachel that we know throughout the series is not as visible in this book as she is in The Visitor and going forward. So that's just an interesting thing. Jake we know because we're in his mind. The three other characters I named, Tobias, Cassie, and Marco, are much more hard on their sleeve people, and Rachel's next in line, and she's kind of a otherworldly, apart from it all and yet part of it figure here. The aliens, we get the introduction of the Taxons and the Hork-Bajir. Elfangor is careful to say that the Taxons are, well, he says evil. We find out eventually in the much later books that they're just hungry and the Yeerks offered them food, but they don't necessarily like working for the Yeerks. And he says that the Hork-Bajir are peaceful. I love Elfangor as a character. As far as older mentor characters in science fiction go, he's my favorite. I guess all of my favorites in the science fiction trope characters are the ones from Animorphs. I'd have to do a much more self-reflection to confirm that, but I love Elfangor. And Visser 3, who does get somewhat ridiculous in later editions as he gets more desperate, is very sinister in this. It is clear why he's the head Yeerk. He says that the Taxons are telling me that you're wild animals who have somehow broken into the Yeerk pool. I know that you're Andalites in Morph. He's got lines like that. It's great, but he's also makes early mistakes, underestimates them. All the sorts of things that you look for in the opening of a franchise, of a long series, an adventure, science fiction sort of thing. Other characters, the only other really important character introductions are Tom and Chapman, the two higher-ranking human controllers. They go well. Jake's desperation that his brother Tom not be a Yeerk, but his ultimately discovering he's a controller and how that plays out, important to his development. And Chapman we get more later on. The introduction of the sharing, which I didn't, before I reread the whole series, I didn't remember much about the sharing, but it is really a very creepy organization, and it's rendered very well here. So I have to finish up The Visitor, because I'm hoping to get that video done today. Each book should get its own video unless I run out of time, but I'm this is kind of like a summer vacation, reading summer vacation for me. When I'm reading the stuff that I blog about, and I won't be blogging about the Animorphs this time because I already blogged about them. But those are things that I feel like I need to read, that are important to read, also great to read. Just finished Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison, wonderful book, highly recommended. But like I said, now that I've read all of Animorphs, it was kind of an assignment before I actually read them all, even though I had fun with it. But now it represents the freedom to just, I've got some time, I'm going to take one of the little Animorphs books off the shelf and read it through, because I can do that in not too much time, and I know I'll have a lot of fun with it. So more to come, and I can go back to ending my YouTube videos by saying "Ram the Blade Ship."